Everyone saw the sign nailed to my fence that morning, but nobody asked who put it there. Maybe because they didn't want to know. Maybe because they already did. It was white plastic, zip-tied like an official notice. Property under review, Simmons Valley, HOA compliance required. The letters looked bold enough to be real, but the ground under my boots told me the truth. This wasn't a neighborhood. This was ranch land mine. 120 acres I'd bought with sweat, scars, and every piece of me that war hadn't broken. Out here, silence wasn't empty. It was earned. And that's why I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, waiting for the sign to explain itself. It didn't, so I ripped it down and tossed it into the burn barrel, watched the fire curl around the edges until the letters crumbled. Then I went back to the porch, poured myself another half cup of bitter coffee, and told myself it was nothing. Kids. A prank. Some lost city person who didn't understand that fences out here don't need HOA approval. That was my first mistake. Underestimating how far someone will go when they think a clipboard makes them powerful. The next day she came. Her SUV rolled across the gravel like she owned the road, paint the color of hospital walls, tires polished like parade boots. She parked sideways, blocking half my drive, like she was setting up a checkpoint, and then she stepped out. Blonde bob, pastel blazer, khakis pressed so sharp they could cut wire. Mirrored sunglasses hiding eyes that didn't look at my land, just at me. "I'm Karen Simmons," she said, chirping like we were about to trade banana bread recipes. "HOA president, just doing my rounds. Thought I'd personally welcome you to the neighborhood." I leaned against the fence post, wiping my hands on a rag. "Help you?" Her smile widened. Simmons Valley Homeowners Association. We're a chartered community coalition maintaining visual and environmental standards across properties. I actually laughed, couldn't help it. "Lady, this is farmland. The only standard out here is not crashing into cows." She didn't blink. She just pulled a manila folder from under her arm, tucked it against her side like it was a sidearm. "Our bylaws cover fencing height, structure types, livestock ratios, noise thresholds. We're in an awareness phase now, but citations begin at the end of the month." I shook my head. "You can't cite a goat." She smiled sweetly. "Oh, we don't cite the goats, just their owners." She handed me the folder, labeled Welcome Packet. Action required. And before I could answer, she pivoted on her orthopedic heels, walked back to her SUV, and drove off. Dust trailing like a retreating convoy. I opened it right there on the fence. Page after page of fake regulations. Diagrams of my barn circled in red. Photos of my fencing from angles I didn't even know existed. One page claimed my satellite dish blocked the southern view corridor. Another said my goats exceeded livestock density standards. I burned the packet before sundown. Watched the pages curl and turn black, just like I had with the first sign. But the thing about fire is, it doesn't erase what's already been set in motion. 2 days later, more signs appeared, laminated this time, zip-tied higher stapled to my barn door, under enforcement review, violations pending. I tore them down again. That's when the men showed up. 2 of them, late 30s, matching khakis and vests with iron-on patches that read HOA Patrol. They carried walkie-talkies and clipboards like they were running a military op. I watched from the porch as they walked my fence line, pointing at my tractor, scribbling notes like they were mapping an enemy stronghold. I stepped off the porch, gravel crunching under my boots. They froze at the sound, the same way you freeze when you hear a shotgun being racked. "Something I can help you with, boys." One of them cleared his throat, voice trembling like he'd practiced it in the mirror. "We're conducting a compliance sweep under HOA protocol." I walked closer slow. "You got a badge?" "We operate under the Simmons Valley Charter." "Great," I said, stepping closer. "Then you're trespassing under the Callahan Property Charter. Leave." They did, but not before one of them dropped his clipboard. I picked it up, Inside, patrol maps of the valley, routes drawn in marker, properties marked with red X's. Mine wasn't just marked, it was labeled Alpha, High Resistance. That was the moment my gut shifted. The moment I realized Karen wasn't just playing pretend. This wasn't cosplay, this was escalation. I called my buddy Langston, a sheriff's deputy, told him what happened. He chuckled when I mentioned Karen. Yeah, she's been around. Called the feed store last year, claimed the roosters were a noise violation. Nobody takes her seriously. But as I looked at those red X's on the map, I knew this wasn't a one-time nuisance. Karen had a plan. And plans like hers never stop at laminated signs. So I started prepping, not for war, for nonsense. Trail cams, motion sensors, floodlights rigged to a remote in my pocket, nothing lethal, just reminders that this land bites back. Because something told me, when they came back, they wouldn't be knocking. And when they did, they wouldn't just be carrying clipboards. You don't forget the sound of trouble, trying to stay quiet. It's like a rhythm you can't mistake, measured, careful, just a heartbeat too fast. That's what I heard before I saw them. The wind was dead, the sky still black. Even the chickens hadn't started their morning arguments. But the crunch on the gravel, it wasn't wind. Too heavy for a stray deer, too light for a truck, and way too coordinated. I didn't panic. My body just moved the way it's trained to, boots on, mug in hand, coffee cold but still bitter enough to keep my nerves sharp. My muscles remembered something my mind hadn't wanted to, that old hum in the blood. The one that had followed me all the way back from Kandahar, but that I thought I'd buried out here in the silence. They were back, Karen's clipboard commandos. Only this time they didn't come to talk. I killed the kitchen lights and pressed my back to the wall, listening. Crunch, pause, crunch, crunch, 5, maybe 6 sets of boots, moving like they thought they were special forces. Out by the barn, their shadows bent across the dirt in the sweep of faint headlamps. They wore vests again, khakis, cheap earpieces glowing faint green. And one, God help me, still had a clipboard strapped to his chest like armor. I crouched low at the window. 3 of them veered off toward the east fence, right where Linda the goat was sleeping in her pen. The other 2 hung near the front gate, hands on something bulky. Radio crackle cut the night. Team Alpha in position. Begin sweep. Target is presumed armed but compliant under Phase 1. Compliant. They thought this was going to be easy. I almost laughed, but the laugh didn't make it to my eyes. Something inside me had already shifted. The calm before contact. Breath deep, shoulders loose, vision narrowing to patterns and angles. I slipped on my coat. The one with the remote trigger sewn into the pocket. I didn't need it. I just wanted to see what happened when they realized this land wasn't just soil and fencing. It was wired to wake up when I told it to. They crossed the second fence line. Quiet, confident, until one of them tripped the wire. Click. Then boom. Not an explosion. A flood. Floodlights erupted across the yard like I'd summoned daylight itself. Sirens screamed from hidden speakers, scattering echoes against the barn walls. My land lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. 2 of the raiders dropped flat into the dirt. One screamed and dove behind the water trough. Another collided with Linda's enclosure. Bad idea. She lowered her head and rammed him in the thigh, flipping him on his back like a rag doll. Then she stood over him, snorting, daring him to move. I stepped onto the porch. No rush, no yelling, just sipping my coffee. Morning, gentlemen, I said, calm as a Sunday sermon. Planning to announce yourselves, or were you hopping for the element of surprise? Clipboard guy stood up, blinking in the floodlights. His voice cracked, but he tried to sound official. We are acting under HOA Emergency Code 7A to seize non-compliant property. I raised an eyebrow. Did you make that up in a coloring book? His hands trembled, but he doubled down. We are empowered by community vote to remove unauthorized structures and enforce property value security. The man to his left raised something. A taser, his voice shook. This is a citizens' enforcement zone. We are within operational bounds. I took one step down from the porch. You're in my yard, armed, threatening seizure of property under laws you printed at Kinko's. That's not enforcement, that's trespassing. Clipboard guy fumbled out a folder, held it up like it was scripture. This document authorizes us. I snatched it from his hand. Half the pages were stamped draft. One had a coffee ring. Another, no kidding, had a slice of melted cheese stuck to the corner. I flipped it back at him. Looks like something a 10th grader wrote after a long night playing Call of Duty. And then I heard it, the low growl of tires on gravel. Real this time. Red and blue lights slicing through the night. The HOA troops froze. Clipboard guy muttered into his radio, "Abort, abort," but it was too late. Sheriff Langston's cruiser rolled slow into the drive, engine humming like a hymn. He stepped out, squinting into the chaos, Linda still glaring at her captive, one man face down in the dirt pretending the ground could protect him, three more frozen like kids caught sneaking out. "Callahan," Langston said, voice flat, "what the hell am I looking at?" "Pre-rehearsal theater," I said, sipping my coffee. "Opening act, HOA SWAT team." Langston turned toward the raiders. His hand hovered near his sidearm. "Hands where I can see 'em. Drop the clipboards." One of them tried, weakly. "We're acting under civilian compliance jurisdiction." Langston walked straight up, grabbed the patch off his vest, ripped it clean off. He held it to the floodlight. "Compliance officer, Tier 2, buddy, you're lucky it doesn't say mall cop." And that was the moment it hit me. Karen wasn't done. This wasn't just a power trip. This wasn't just cosplay. It was organized, funded, targeted. And I wasn't the only one on her list. Langston flipped through the binder he'd pulled off one of the men, and I swear, the more he read aloud, the heavier the air got. "Violation classes," he muttered, thumbing the laminated pages. "Class 1, fencing misalignment. Class 2, unauthorized rooster activity. Class 3, hostile resident behavior." He stopped, raised his eyes at me. "Callahan, I've seen cults with fewer rules than this." Clipboard guy stammered. We were told to enforce protocol." "By who?" Langston asked, voice sharp. The silence stretched. Finally, one of them whispered, "Simmons." I said it louder, "Karen." Langston nodded once. 3 arrests, 2 citations, 1 full report filed with the county investigator before dawn. The whole thing went from laughable to lethal in a matter of minutes. And yet, even as he loaded those men into the cruiser, something gnawed at me. Because people that organized, people willing to cut through fences in the dark, carry tasers, and laminate fake laws, don't just disappear because a sheriff tears a patch off their vest. And I was right. That afternoon, a certified letter landed in my mailbox. Thick envelope, bold type, my name scrawled across the front. Inside, a lawsuit. Karen Simmons versus Callahan. Charges: hostile disruption of a sanctioned community action, undermining volunteer enforcement personnel, intentional obstruction of cooperative land reclamation. And the worst part, it wasn't handwritten garbage like before. This was real, signed by a licensed attorney, someone with credentials, someone funding her fight. But tucked inside that envelope wasn't just legal jargon. It was a list, typed, highlighted, deliberate. The names. Not just mine, not just neighbors. One name I knew better than anyone. A man I'd worked beside. A man who'd helped me raise my barn wall by wall. Next to his name, one word, informant. My chest went hollow. It's one thing to fight an enemy at your gate. It's another to find them already inside your circle. They say power corrupts, but nobody tells you how fast it happens when the only thing standing between someone and total control is a clipboard and a handful of scared neighbors. Karen didn't fold after the arrests. She didn't back down, she doubled down, and she dragged the whole damn neighborhood with her. It started with the flyers. She didn't just stick them in mailboxes. She staked them into the ground like territory markers, printed in grayscale, stapled to plastic, lined up at the entrance to our road like military checkpoints. Each one bore an aerial shot of my ranch, probably from a drone labeled Zone B noncompliant. High risk. Below, bullet points, unauthorized livestock, illegal fencing configuration, documented hostility to enforcement officers. And at the bottom, subject has refused all attempts at reintegration. Neighbors are advised to avoid unsanctioned contact. I stood in my field staring at one of those flyers, the photo of my land outlined in red, and it hit me like a gut punch. She wasn't just coming after my goats. She was isolating me. And the cruel thing, it worked. Neighbors who used to wave stopped meeting my eyes. The man who sold me feed quietly raised his prices. A family that had shared my 4th of July cookout last year posted a message in the community forum. We support order. We support community standards. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the risk. I thought I'd left behind the war. I thought a ranch meant peace. But standing there in my own field, reading words that labeled me a risk to my neighbors, I realized something brutal. This wasn't a petty feud anymore. Karen was building a regime. And then she held her rally. No permits, no chairs, just a fold-out table, a microphone, and a poster board that read, Emergency Compliance Briefing, Tier 3 Response. I stood across the street, arms crossed, not hiding, watching. 15 people showed up, some confused, some scared. A few already wearing orange safety vests with HOA volunteer ironed onto the back. Karen tapped the mic, her voice cracked through the cheap speaker. We're under siege, she declared, and it's coming from within. She held up one of the flyers, my barn circled in red, my goats scribbled as bullet points. This resident has refused compliance for 3 consecutive review cycles. He has verbally threatened officers. He has refused dialogue. He thinks he's untouchable, but no one is above the rules. Her finger pointed across the road, at me. 15 pairs of eyes turned, some wide, some hard, some ashamed. Karen's words rang out like a sermon. He may call it freedom, we call it negligence, we call it disorder. I shouted back, couldn't help it. You call a goat screaming at dawn a security threat. But Karen didn't break stride. She passed out more flyers like communion wafers. Then she raised her hand and said the words that sank in deep. Effective immediately, the HOA is initiating a community isolation protocol. Residents are discouraged from contact. No favors, no support, no engagement. Some clapped, some nodded, some just stared at me like I'd already been sentenced. That was when it stopped being funny. Karen didn't just want compliance. She wanted obedience, and she was willing to starve me of community until I broke. But she'd forgotten one thing. I'd been starved before, in deserts, in cities, in silence so heavy it crushed the bones. And I didn't break then. I wasn't about to break now. They say isolation is the sharpest weapon, but sometimes it's not enough for people like Karen. Sometimes they need blood in the water. The first cut was small. My trail cams offline, one then another then a third. I checked the wiring myself, not chewed, not corroded, cut, clean, deliberate. Somebody had stood out there in the dark, snipping away at my defenses like it was a game. Langston came out, flashlight sweeping over the fence line. He shook his head. You think it's her? She's the only one who knows where I set these. He sighed heavy. She's not just posturing anymore. That night the white sedan appeared. Parked 2 properties down, engine idling, tinted windows blacker than oil. It didn't move for hours. I sat on my porch with binoculars, watching, waiting. When I finally walked toward it, flashlight in hand, the engine revved and it peeled out into the night. I ran the plates the next morning, registered to something called Community Horizon Outreach. The listed director, Karen Simmons. She built a shell nonprofit just to fund her surveillance. And then came Max. My border collie, 8 years old, smarter than most of the people trying to ruin me, loyal enough to follow me through a storm. That night I heard him whimpering near the barn. The sound cut through me faster than any siren. I found him behind the ATV, shaking, one paw bleeding. When I touched it, he yelped. Blood, a deep cut, embedded glass. I checked the barn floor with my flashlight. Shards of green-brown glass scattered near the rear door, not broken by accident, placed there, hidden where paws would step. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just knelt down, scooped Max into my arms and whispered, "It's okay, I've got you." Langston arrived 20 minutes later. He swept the barn, his jaw tight, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "This was a message." And he was right, because the line I'd drawn, the line I thought Karen wouldn't cross, she had just danced over it. So the next day, I went public. I uploaded everything. The raid footage, the fake seizure warrants, the laminated flyers, surveillance logs, the binder with violation classes, the injury photos of Max's paw wrapped and bleeding. I posted it all with one caption, "When the HOA thinks they're the FBI." And the world listened. Within hours, the video exploded. Thousands of shares, comments pouring in from strangers, people in other rural towns saying they'd seen the same tactics, fake notices, drone shots, threats wrapped in legal jargon. 24 hours later, it had 300,000 views. Karen's online defenders vanished. Her so-called compliance team split in half, some resigning quietly, others pretending they'd never been involved. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd won. But Karen wasn't finished. Because 2 days later, she showed up at my door. No SUV parade, no sunglasses, just a manila folder in her hand, and no smile. "You think this is about goats?" she asked, her voice low. I didn't answer. "You think this ends with me?" She stepped forward, close enough I could smell the sharp citrus of her perfume. "You've kicked something you don't understand." Then she handed me the folder and walked away. I carried it inside, dropped it on the kitchen table, let it sit there 6 hours before I opened it, not because I was afraid of what was inside, because I already knew what it meant. When I finally flipped it open, the words crawled across the page like ghosts from another life. Regional Initiative, Rural Behavioral Management, Phase 2. Government seals, memos, real formatting, contacts I recognized, not HOA cosplay, not Karen's printer ink. This wasn't just Karen anymore. It was federal. I sat there staring at the binder, feeling that old weight crawl up my spine. Memories of overseas deployments when we weren't just soldiers, we were implementers. They called them post-conflict engagement zones. Change the signs, change the rules, change the way people talk about their neighbors. And now, the same doctrine was staring at me from my own kitchen table. Karen hadn't invented this, she'd been handed it. She wasn't the architect, she was the test pilot. And me. I wasn't the enemy. I was the prototype. When I slid the folder across the table, Langston didn't speak. He just flipped through it page by page, his face hardening with each stamp, each header, each memo that looked less like fiction and more like federal doctrine. "Where'd you get this?" he asked finally. I kept my eyes on my coffee. She gave it to me, said I'd kicked something I couldn't stop. He closed the folder jaw tight. Then he made a call, not to the sheriff's office, to the county attorney. She showed up that afternoon. Sharp, fast-moving, eyes that could slice lies in half before they left your lips. She came with an investigator and a portable scanner. They spread the documents across my table, dissecting every page like surgeons. Within an hour, they'd verified the seals, checked the formatting, confirmed the headers matched active government templates. Finally, she looked up. Did you know about this program? I hesitated. I knew the people who built it. Her eyes narrowed. You were in the room. I didn't answer, but my silence said enough. That was all they needed. By nightfall, a warrant was signed. Karen Simmons listed in 5 separate cases across county lines: false citations, impersonation, financial fraud. Langston and 2 agents rolled out the next morning, warrant in hand, dash cam running. When she opened the door, she still had the same smug smile, clipboard tucked under her arm like a diplomatic credential. You have a warrant, she asked, sweet as poison. Langston held it up. You first. The search started in her study. Books, maps, ledgers stamped with HOA seals that looked real enough to fool half a county clerk's office. But the real find wasn't in the open. Behind a false panel in the bookshelf, they uncovered a narrow doorway. No knob, just a sliding latch. Inside an office, clean, surgical. Binders stacked wall to wall. A whiteboard plastered with names, maps, schedules, a rotation chart. And in the corner, a bank of monitors, dark, except for 3 screens still paused on camera feeds. One of them, my barn. Langston pulled down the binders one by one. Read the labels out loud like he couldn't believe them. Resident Tier Guide. Compliance Scripts. Corrective Language Index. Psychological Reinforcement Tactics. Asset Conversion Model. Phase 3 Strategy Outline. He opened the first binder. My name at the top. Photos of my property, diagrams of my fencing, timestamps of when I woke up, when I fed the animals, when my lights went off at night. You wake up around 4:50 most mornings, Langston read. Feed animals by 6, occasionally leave lights on past midnight, rarely seen with visitors. Pattern rating, defiant, autonomous vigilance. He looked at me. They were profiling you. Not just me, I said quietly. He flipped the pages. More names, neighbors, one labeled compliant, another labeled exit achieved, a third pending disruption. That resident had sold out last month. Langston stepped back, his voice low. This isn't HOA, this is psychological warfare. They bagged everything, box after box. By sunset, Karen was in cuffs. The county attorney filed charges that night. Criminal harassment, wire fraud, illegal surveillance, impersonating a public official, conspiracy to defraud. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it, called it a community experiment in grassroots cohesion. Langston just shook his head. It's a cult with a mailing list. But even after the cuffs, after the warrants, after the binders were bagged, the damage lingered. Because people I'd known, people who once shook my hand at the feed store, people who sat at my table during the 4th of July, had signed onto Karen's project. Some as enforcers, some as watchers, some because they were scared of being the next red X on her map. That night, Jerry showed up at my gate, the neighbor who'd stopped waving months back. He stood there, hat in his hands, eyes downcast. I didn't know it would go this far, he muttered. You believed her, I said. He swallowed hard. She told us if we didn't help enforce it, we'd be next. I nodded once, closed the gate behind him. But the truth clawed at me. Karen wasn't the architect. She wasn't even the mastermind. She was just a test pilot. And whatever blueprint she was running, it wasn't finished. 2 days later, the county cracked one of her hard drives, and what they found blew the case wide open. Files not just on me, on 6 other properties, drone footage, fencing audits, even voice recordings captured from porch conversations. This wasn't about goats, or fences, or barns. They didn't just want your land. They wanted to watch you, predict you, control you, then erase you. And the scariest part. Karen wasn't alone. Her binder carried signatures, memos linked to names I recognized, old intel officers, contractors I'd crossed paths with years ago, people who knew how to build programs that strip freedom one rule at a time. This wasn't a local problem. It was a system. And I was its prototype. The drone came back at 4:12 a.m. I knew it wasn't the same one as before. The hum was different, higher, sharper, more deliberate. This one didn't hover. It swept low across the barn roof, buzzing the tree line before vanishing into the night. 15 minutes later, I found it. Not the drone itself, but the mark it left behind. Near the north fence, a circle was burned into the dirt. Perfect. Black. 2 slash marks cut across the center like an X, the same symbol Langston had spotted at another property 2 counties over. It wasn't graffiti, it was a designation. They weren't just watching anymore, they were marking. That night, I barely slept. Every noise was a trigger, every silence a warning. By dawn, I was back at the monitors, watching thermal signatures sweep across the feed. And that's when I saw them. 3 heat signatures, hunkered in the woods' southwest corner. They'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, still as stone. Then they rose, moving toward my driveway. No headlights, no vehicle in sight. When they broke cover, I saw them clearly: black vests, tactical boots, muted radios. One had a clipboard strapped across his chest. The other 2, rifles, real ones, clean, well slung. I didn't panic. I shut the laptop, locked the barn, walked back to the porch and waited. Clipboard man stepped forward, voice steady like he'd rehearsed it 100 times. "We're here for seizure protocol." "You think this is legal?" I asked. "You've failed to comply with re-education notices. Your vehicle and property are listed as forfeitable under Emergency Clause B9. He pulled a page from his folder, held it up like it mattered. "You've been designated a primary resistance node." The man to his right twitched, eyes darting toward the trees, fingers flexing on his rifle like he wasn't ready for the weight. The one on the left was too calm, too still. His eyes weren't on me, they were fixed on the door behind me. "You're outnumbered," clipboard man said. "Don't make this hard." I stepped forward 1 pace, looked him dead in the eye. "Tell me something, who trained you?" He hesitated, just long enough for me to know the truth. They weren't soldiers, they weren't law, they weren't even professionals. They were believers. I tapped the silent trigger on my watch. Steel barriers hissed up from the driveway. Floodlights cut the darkness, not steady beams, strobes, pulsing red and white, designed to confuse. Sirens screamed, bouncing echoes off the barn walls. Clipboard man shielded his eyes. Twitchy raised his rifle. Mistake. 2 flashbangs deployed from the corners of my deck. No shrapnel, just thunder, loud enough to shake the marrow out of your bones. They dropped like sacks of grain. And just like that, my field turned into theirs. Except this time, I had home advantage. I closed the distance, low and fast, grabbed Twitchy's rifle barrel, twisted, and slammed him into the gravel. He wheezed, arms slack. The calm one turned to run, but he froze when a voice thundered across the yard. "Weapons down now." "Langston." No sirens, no lights, just his cruiser idling at the end of my drive, his sidearm drawn steady. Backup stepped out behind him, real law this time. Clipboard man tried to raise something. Langston fired into the dirt between his boots. The puff of dust was louder than the bullet. They froze. Weapons hit the ground. 4 more emerged from the woods, hands raised. 7 in total. Langston cuffed the first one, turned to me. "They said they were part of something bigger." "They're not bluffing," I said. He pulled a patch off one vest, held it up to the floodlight. "Enforcement, Tier 1, Phase 4 certified." His eyes narrowed. "You know what that means?" I nodded. "I do now." At the station, most of them clammed up, but one didn't. The quiet one, the calm one. Right before they loaded him into the cruiser, he looked at me through the bars and smiled. "Phase 4 isn't about you," he said softly. "You think this ends here, you think this was about land." He leaned closer, his eyes were steady, almost pitying. "It's about pattern disruption. You're not the enemy, you're the prototype." Then he winked. And they drove him away. That night, Langston and I stood on my porch. Max lay at my feet, paw bandaged, ears pricked at every sound. "You think they'll come again?" Langston asked. "They won't stop," I said. "Not until this goes public, or I disappear." His eyes flicked toward the table inside, where the last hard drive sat waiting. A label written in black Sharpie, just one word. "Callahan." "You going to open it?" he asked. "Not yet." "What are you waiting for?" I looked out across the dark field, at the fences, at the trees, at the silence that was no longer mine. "Leverage," I said. Because once I opened that drive, once I saw what they had on me, I wouldn't just be defending my land anymore. I'd be dragging the truth out of the shadows. And it wouldn't just end Karen's legacy. It might end mine. The drive sat on my kitchen table for 4 days. Not because I was scared of it, because I knew what opening it meant. Once I saw what was inside, there'd be no pretending this was just Karen's madness. No telling myself it was just some local power trip gone feral. Once I opened it, I'd know exactly who had been pulling the strings. The label was simple. Callahan, block letters, thick black Sharpie, no logo, no date, no context, just my name, staring back at me like a mirror I didn't want to face. Langston stopped by the third night. He saw it sitting there. "Want me to run it through evidence systems?" I shook my head. No, if they've spent this much time watching me, then they deserve to see me watching back. So on the 4th day, I slid the drive into the laptop. The screen flickered, once, twice, then a logo appeared. OPRM, Operational Rural Management. Not HOA, not county, federal. I knew the acronym instantly, because I had helped write part of it. 12 years ago, in a conference room lit by buzzing fluorescents, I'd submitted a report, outlined weaknesses in rural command structures, suggested techniques for stabilizing communities after conflict. They called it post-instability recalibration. And now every word, every suggestion, every diagram I, once drafted in service of security, had been twisted into this. The drive opened 4 folders. Phase 1, Infiltration. Phase 2, Conditioning. Phase 3, Pressure. Phase 4, Correction. Inside Phase 1, Property Maps. Photos, drone footage of my barn, my fields, my porch. Audio recordings, conversations I'd had with Langston, with neighbors, even private words I'd muttered to Max under my breath when I thought no one was listening. Each file had a label. Subject Callahan, classification autonomous, strategic, influence resistant. Then came the recordings. My own voice. From years ago, calls I'd made in uniform discussing how to manage outlier behavior clusters, outlines for re-education models, protocols for reintegrating resistant populations. They hadn't just weaponized a system against me. They'd weaponized my own words. The next folder made me cold. Personnel files. Karen's HOA presidency, funded, promoted, managed. Flyers, committees, compliance teams, all part of a rollout under a shell nonprofit. She wasn't the architect. She was the instrument. Then came the final file, simply labeled, Message, Tier Alpha. I clicked. Karen's face filled the screen. Not the smug HOA president in khakis, not the clipboard warrior handing out flyers. This was different, composed, polished, like she was delivering a church sermon. "If you're watching this," she began, voice steady, "then you've seen the truth. I didn't start this, but I believed in it, still do." Her eyes locked into the camera, unblinking. "People like you don't obey, you disrupt. That's why we needed you. You showed us what resistance looks like and how to break it." Then she smiled, a calm, quiet smile. And the screen cut to black. I sat in silence for a long time, not because I was broken, but because I was steady, steadier than I'd been in years. They thought I'd fold under the weight of seeing my own fingerprints all over this, that the guilt would eat me alive, that the shame would silence me. But shame is a weak leash, and guilt can turn to fire if you know how to carry it. Langston arrived an hour later. He saw my face and didn't need to ask. "You opened it." I nodded. "How bad?" I exhaled, "Bad enough." He waited, patient, silent. Finally he asked, "What now?" I stared out the window, at the barn lit pale by moonlight, at Max limping slightly as he crossed the yard, still guarding what was his, what was ours. "I end it," I said. But I didn't call the press. I didn't call a reporter or leak it to some blog. I went to the source, filed a federal whistleblower complaint, attached every file, every recording, redacted neighbors' names because they were pawns, not players, but I named the contractors, the agencies, the signatures. And then I hit publish. Within hours it spread. Former employees came forward. Oversight hearings were opened. Karen was indicted again, this time on federal charges, and OPRM, Operational Rural Management, was officially decommissioned. Again. But paperwork doesn't kill ideology. And out here, silence still carries weight. Sometimes too much. Because when the quiet settles now, it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like a pause. A waiting game. The barn holds, the fences stand. Max still limps, but he runs, chasing goats like nothing ever touched him. On the surface, life looks like it's back to normal. But normal is a word that doesn't fit anymore. Not after what I saw on that drive. Because the last file wasn't a report, it wasn't a binder or a flyer, it was an email. Encrypted, buried so deep it took the county's best to pry it open. No sender, no signature, just one subject line, reassignment, pilot zone, Midwest beta. And coordinates. Not Simmons Valley, not anywhere near here. Somewhere colder, flatter, easier to disappear. That's when I understood the most brutal truth of all. Phase 4 didn't end here, it just moved down the list. They thought I was the problem, the variable, the glitch in the system. But I was the proof. The whistleblower filing went public. Oversight committees in suits sat in air-conditioned rooms, flipping through my files like they were just another case study. They asked questions, contractors testified, and for a moment, I thought maybe the truth was finally free. But freedom doesn't come from hearings. It doesn't come from indictments. It comes from knowing, from not being blind anymore. And once you see the machinery behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. Langston stood with me on the porch one night, the air cool, the sky thick with stars that didn't care about our fights. "You think it's over?" he asked. I shook my head. Paper says it's over, but paper doesn't stop ideas. He nodded, slow, like a man who'd seen too much to argue. Because the truth is, it never ends. Not the watching, not the maps, not the rules dressed up as kindness. Sometimes Max growls when a truck slows at the gate. Sometimes I hear a drone hum where there isn't one. Sometimes silence feels less like peace and more like someone holding their breath. I still get messages from strangers, people in other counties, other states. It started here too. They called it a volunteer coalition. The documents looked real. We thought we were the only ones. They ask me what to do. I always tell them the same thing. Don't wait for someone else to fight your battle, because if they've already drawn the map, then you're already on it. One night, I went back to the files. Not because I had to, because I couldn't let them sit there without finishing what they'd started. Buried deep past the reports, past the memos, past the recordings of my own voice, there was a final folder. Locked. No label this time, just my name again. When I cracked it open, the screen went white, then black. A single message scrolled across. Phase 4 complete. I stared at it for a long time, not sure if it was a threat, a bluff, or a line already crossed. But then it blinked, once, twice, and the screen cleared. A list of names appeared. Not mine, not my neighbors. Others. Across the Midwest, the South, places I'd never been, people I'd never met. Every one of them tagged the same way I'd been. Autonomous, resistant, influence hard. That's when I knew. This wasn't about goats, or fences, or even land. This was about people like me, people who don't bend, who don't slot neatly into a system, who ask the wrong questions and stand too long in the wrong silence. Karen hadn't been trying to break me for my ranch. She'd been trying to break me because I was proof the system didn't always work. And when systems don't work, people like her get scared. People above her get dangerous. So I do what I can, keep the land, keep the animals, keep the silence alive even when it feels heavy. Because peace doesn't mean safety, and safety doesn't mean freedom. Sometimes freedom is just standing your ground when the world tells you to move. Max barks at the night sometimes. I listen. Then I whisper the same words I told him the night I carried him bleeding out of the barn. It's okay, I've got you. But I'm not just talking to him anymore. I'm talking to anyone out there staring at a flyer, at a map, at a rule that doesn't make sense but demands obedience anyway. Anyone who feels that cold silence creeping in, wondering if they're already on the list. You're not alone. And if they come knocking, remember this. When you stop being afraid, they stop being powerful.